Good morning, everyone. It's absolutely fantastic to have so many of you joining us for this second edition of Voices from the Ground. I'm Apricot Wilson, Head of Risk and Impact of the Luxembourg Microfinance and Development Fund, a Luxembourg-based impact investment firm focused on supporting Tier 2 and Tier 3 microfinance institutions, or MFIs, as we will probably say during most of this podcast, across the globe. We know that many of the people listening, many of our investors and our colleagues working in microfinance are very interested in understanding what is happening with microfinance institutions and to micro entrepreneurs during this time. For this reason, we're hosting a series of webinars speaking to those based in the field to see what is happening on the ground. Next week, we'll be headed to Burkina Faso. Le webinaire aura lieu en français, alors s'il y a les francophones qui ne pouvaient pas nous joindre aujourd'hui, ça c'est l'occasion pour eux. Nous serons rejoints par une analyste basée dans la région et une IMF. Today, however, we're delighted to focus on Southeast Asia, on Cambodia and Myanmar. Cambodia used to be a very significant country for the fund and remained the mainstay of most microfinance investment vehicles. The fund took the decision to reduce its work in Cambodia following concerns over market saturation and very recently exited the country. Nonetheless, its business as usual approach is very interesting to examine, particularly in contrast with Myanmar, where the fund has 2.6 million euros of investments in two institutions, Advance and Alliance. Myanmar has introduced very rigorous reforms to the financial industry as a result of COVID, as we will hear shortly. I'd now like to introduce my speakers for the day. Wendy Medrano-Lazo, who has worked with ADA for over 10 years. We were all very, very sorry indeed when Wendy decided to leave us here in Luxembourg and work for ADA regionally in Southeast Asia. However, we're delighted that she's now able to join us via Zoom. First of all, she started her work in Southeast Asia building up the Myanmar Microfinance Association and was based on site. She's since taken a role in Cambodia as a regional technical advisor and works closely with the microfinance associations in Laos, Myanmar and Cambodia. She'll be mainly expressing opinions on Myanmar today. We're also joined by Mr. Phal Vandy, Executive Director of Cambodia Microfinance Association, whose 103 members are providing over $7 billion loans to 2.5 million Cambodians across the country. Mr. Vandy's experience is extensive and impressive, with over 18 years leading international development agencies, coordinating and managing multi-sectorial development projects, including with the World Bank, EU, and several microfinance ministries. Without further ado, let us get into the main discussion, which will take the same format as last week. I will present a short questions and answer session, leaving plenty of time for the audience to submit their own questions to the panelists. This can be done via the questions and answers function, and these will be reviewed at the end of the presentation. Now, I know I've already given a brief introduction to the two of you, Wendy and Mr. Vandy, but I think it would be interesting if you could tell us a bit about your work in Southeast Asia and what you were doing prior to the COVID crisis. Perhaps, Wendy, we'll start with you.
Yes, hello everyone. I am ADA's technical advisor based in Phnom Penh, and my work consists mainly on managing our capacity building projects with national microfinance associations in the region, which are Cambodian, Laos, and Myanmar microfinance associations. I provide technical assistance to our three partners, and I support them in the implementation of their activities and the services that they provide to the member MFIs. Prior to COVID-19, let's say we had different priorities. We were planning different trainings, technical assistant programs. We were defining research topics for this year. We started organizing regional and national events. My job also requires a lot of traveling, which of course at this moment is stopped.
And I imagine you've had quite a change in focus now.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we're basically just focused on response to the crisis of COVID-19.
Okay, and Mr. Vandy, could you tell us about the Cambodian Microfinance Association and your role within it?
Hi, yes. My role at the association is to ensure effective coordination among the member and support to ensure the sector is continue to grow and sustainable. And before the COVID-19, we were doing pretty well. We thought that we would having a lot of priority to move the sector forwards, to make the sector stronger in terms of how we can grow microfinance, which is important for the country economic to support the rural poor in access to finance. So after the crisis, we now have dropped a lot of priority that give us more time and priority focus on the response to the impact of COVID-19 on the client and on the institutional member that who are striving to continue to ensure the service for the client, for the people. Yes.
And we'll go into a bit more details in the response a bit later. But I think firstly, it's quite useful to have a bit of an idea of the context of what's happening in Cambodia currently. Cambodia's adopted a slightly different approach from a lot of countries, from my understanding, hasn't it, Mr. Vandy?
Yes. So I think the approach that we are taking is do not over panic, but also do not underestimate the situation. So at the early stage, our government have been telling everybody and including us ourselves that we should not be over panicked with this crisis. However, we also learn from different experience in different countries, that including in Chinese and other countries in the region, and also in European countries. So we start to realize to adopt another approach to take a stronger, measurable intervention to make sure that we are safe from these impacts. So I think do not underestimate the issue is also very important at this stage to maintain a confidence in how we handle the crisis to respond it's in a good speed on time is also important that we learn across this COVID crisis.
And has there been any particular advice given to microfinance institutions? Are they instructed to remain open?
Yes, we coordinate together with Association of Bank and the Central Bank and our government. So microfinance commit to stay open to ensure our service available across the crisis through different modes of solve the situation evolve. So now we stay open physically, but across the function we adapt technology to ensure that we still make the service accessible to our clients who are in the crisis.
Okay, and again, I think we'll go into that a bit further in a minute, but Wendy, what about Myanmar? I understand it's taken a very different response to COVID. Mute. I think you may be on mute. Sorry.
Yes, sorry. Yes, in Myanmar, well, there's similar measures taken by other governments. So the government took measures in regards of canceling public events, entertainment venues, restaurants, and religious gatherings, and it's encouraging people to stay at home. And on top of this, each regional government has issued their own measures. So, for example, Mandalay regional government was the first one to impose travel restrictions within Mandalay region until I think the end of this month. And this means that all entry and exit from Mandalay region is prohibited. Hotels and guest houses were required to close. Public transportation was suspended. And like this, you have differences by region. And regarding the microfinance sector, it was the same situation. Each regional government started taking their own measures, which made it a challenge because it created a lot of confusion and panic among clients, among staff. And there was not guidance from FRD, which is the regulator in Myanmar, for a unified response until this Monday. this Monday, the Microfinance Supervisory Committee issued an instruction to all microfinance institutions operating in Myanmar to suspend disbursement, to suspend collection, to stop accepting deposits, receiving loan applications, and stop doing financial literacy trainings. And this until the end of the month. Sorry?
It must have come as quite a shock to MFIs. How have they reacted? How are they adapting to this very new and very sudden change?
Well, just to say, before answering that they can still, branches can still remain open, but with no more than 5 staff and for very specific activities, which are emergency loans, voluntary payments, or of course, saving withdrawal. And one of the key challenges is that this instruction, it's added to what the regional governments are deciding. So sometimes there are discrepancies between both, and that's also creating a lot of confusion still. And to this you add panic among people, and also a lot of misinformation happening in social media. So it's quite a challenge, taking into account that there's so far 22 cases reported in Myanmar.
Yeah.
And well, the microfinance institutions, how they have reacted. Well, first of all, I think the majority of microfinance institutions, they were and they are very aware of the situation and the challenges that their staff and the clients are facing right now. So many of them actually suspended operations before it was an instruction. And also considering that right now the Tinjan holiday, which is the new year here, is started. No, actually it starts on Saturday. It's also a critical time for everybody to help reducing the spread of the virus, and activity tend to be low during this time anyway. However, the concern actually is the duration of these restrictions, because longer periods of restrictions could have a huge impact on the sector and on the clients. And for instance, rainy season is very near.
Yeah.
And of course, financing will be needed. Disbursements are done in early May, June, and disbursements are needed at this time of the year. So this is clearly a concern if the restrictions continue after the end of the month. And well, if you add to that the fact that MFIs are giving grace periods to their clients, this could be there could be a big liquidity issue actually on financing loans. So these are the great concerns at this point. A lot of uncertainty. There's a lot to still discuss and decide with regulators to address these concerns, and to issue clear instructions about long restructuring or negotiate waivers with for MFIs. But it's it will be very important to, for example, to accelerate the approval of new loans for MFIs to respond to these liquidity needs. In the past, and I know some of the investors here can agree with me, in the past, this process of validating loans for MFIs take a very long time. Almost 6 months to 1 year, and at this moment this needs to be done urgently.
Yeah, I think that's a very useful bit of advice for those of us who are working as investors here. Sorry, this is such an interesting area. Just we hear about the impact on the microfinance institutions, but what about the impact on the micro entrepreneurs of this confusion and this suspense? How are we seeing it? How are we seeing the impact on the informal economy within Myanmar?
Yeah, well, many many shops and many small businesses are closed. And from what I hear from microfinance institutions, they have both type of messages. Some cannot repay their loan, and they are also afraid of credit agents coming to the villages. But they also have messages from clients that want to repay and don't know what to do. So it's just very confusing for everybody, and it's still the beginning. In Myanmar, it's early days. I mean, all of this is happening since last week. This week, mainly, we're looking at more measures.
Moving back to Cambodia, of course, it's less restrictive, but obviously there must be an impact on micro entrepreneurs within Cambodia too. Mr. Vandy, do you have anything to say on this?
Yes, there are impact mainly on tourism, hotel, restaurant, transportation, construction, and also a lot of school, private business, and small business also heavily impacts. And a lot of closing also, especially the restaurant and the small business. So at this time across the country, it's a difficult time for us. And for those entrepreneurs who have difficulty in cash flow and income, and we hear a lot of warning from them to our institution member about their challenges. A lot of requests from them for the postpone of payment back to the institution, to the microfinance institution. We receive a lot of formal and informal requests from those business and also small and micro entrepreneurs across the country. Yeah.
And is there, your members are creating a coordinated response to this?
Yes, we work closely with the central bank to come up with a regulation on loan restructure. So there was specific guidance on the response to the client who are impacted by the COVID-19, especially the client that needs support during this crisis. So the coordination body from the association, we coordinate with the central bank and also relevant government ministry to make sure we implement this regulation effectively. But at the same time, from the association, we also try to work a lot to prevent public hazards because there might be the misunderstanding that some people might take advantage from the situation. So we at the association try to suggest to both institution and also to the client to work together as a partner to resolve the problem in a win-win situation.
Actually, it's interesting what Wendy was saying about the challenges of communication that have been occurring in Myanmar. What has Cambodia been doing about that? I'm sure both Vandy and Wendy have some comments on this.
Yes. Wendy, you want to start or you want me to?
You can start.
Okay. For Cambodia, we face similar challenge through social media. Some politicians, they took the regulation to interpret in a different way that creates some misunderstanding and wrong perception across the public. Some might say microfinance institution doesn't have enough during this crisis. But there are also some challenge in communication because, as you might know, from the association and institution, we look to the client as the same as our business because the client success is the success of the institution. So all the misunderstanding, we try to work with the government, with also from association to have a proper message to communicate back to the public. So we build a common understanding to work together as a partner to overcome this difficult time together as a partner, so we can stay sustained together across this difficult time.
Thank you. And I suppose, oh, sorry, Wendy.
Yeah, I know. I mean, yes, we are actually working with CMA and the other association as well to try to do these communication campaigns, also collecting the most frequently asked questions from clients to create communication tools like videos, small videos with proper messages, so that we can respond to the questions of the clients. And we are doing that in coordination with the associations.
Okay, and moving on to a slightly different topic, well, I suppose related to communication. We last week were visiting Kenya, who were saying how important digital trends have been, and I think we're very lucky to have our Kenyan MFI on the line again today. I wondered how much MFIs in Cambodia and Myanmar had been able to leverage digitalization within their business continuity plans at the moment. Wendy, do you want to start on this?
Yes. Well, there is definitely a will to use digital tools as much as possible. So internally, most organizations are using, like us, digital communication tools like Skype, Zoom, or video conference programs, as well as mobile phones. And they are adapting the way of meeting across organizations, and that's actually very, very important. We were looking at these problems with staff in Myanmar, and I think that's one of the key lessons. Communication across the organization is key in a period of crisis. In regards to the clients, I think MFIs are trying to optimize what they had before, what exists, working with digital payment platforms, for example. However, it is still something that the clients need to learn more about. So let's say that the real use of digital at the level of the client is still very limited, so it cannot be generalized. So there's a long way to go in that sense, but there's definitely a will from the microfinance institutions to use as much as possible digital channels.
And Mr. Vandy, do you have anything to add on this?
I agree with Wendy that it's still a long ways. Even if we try so hard to start to begin this important works, there's still a lot of room to continue to improve, especially in the context of Cambodia, where internet access and also the capacity of the client and also small institutions are still limited. So, but there are potential on the way that we need to work harder to improve that. Yes.
Perhaps I know we've got quite a few questions and answers coming in, and please do submit them over the questions and answers facilities. But perhaps one last question from myself or from our side. It's clear that the situation in Cambodia may become more challenging. How are MFIs preparing for this?
I think as I said earlier, that we cannot underestimate the situation. So I think from the association, we have stepped up from the boards and from our member CEOs. We have prepared a different scenario, so the situation evolve in different case. How can we operate ourselves? How we coordinate among ourselves? How we coordinate with government? How we have our client? How we can maintain our service available for the client? So those sort of risk and response scenario have been put on the table and have been discussed in a confidential way with the boss and with the top management of our members, and I think partnership is remain a very important at this stage to commit to a win-win solution, to maintain an honest, open communication, to respond to the crisis as our joint destiny, to make sure we have a joint solution to move forward is the most important. And to manage wrong perception, to ensure that we all on the same page is also very important, both private sector and the government. So these are the areas we have been stepped up about. And also to communicate that openly with our lender is also important. So we in Cambodia start to draft our message, to communicate, to open, to update to our lender on the situation in the country. And if the situation continue to prolong, there will be a worse impact. We will continue to work with the lender to make sure that we will be flexible across the situation. Yeah.
Brilliant. I think you've given us some very good takeaways for the future, the importance of partnerships and the importance of communication. There's certainly been quite a contrast with last week's programme. It's given us a very good insight into the roles that microfinance associations have to play. I'm sure there's been quite a lot of varied responses, and I'd now like to ask the audience to drop more questions into the chat. We'll start with the first two that I've received. So I've got a question from Nitin, which is, what is the understanding emerging about the impact of the prevailing situation, specifically on women MSMEs? Wendy, would you like to start with this one?
Yes, well, in Myanmar, as I said, it's very early stages, and it is going to have a huge impact on micro and small enterprises. We already see, and I've talked to people who's living there, that basically everybody that's selling in the streets or small enterprises that have one or two people working with them are closing. So it's definitely going to be a huge impact. It's a little bit early to really understand what's the magnitude of the problem, but of course this is one of the main concerns of the government, and I think in the weeks to come they will be announcing some measures to support micro entrepreneurs whose businesses have been impacted.
And Mr. Vandy?
I think in Cambodia, it's also an early stage to understand clearly what is the real impact especially on women, on the small business. But we start to learn that the warning is coming from them. So we continue to listen. We have the hotline. We have the client complaint handling mechanism, so the client can continue to communicate to us. So to both the institution and to the association. So we will continue to monitor that closely and continue to respond as it comes.
And can I just, Jenny and Carla, I'm noticing a few questions popping up in the chat. Could you make sure that they're sent via the questions and answers facilities, because I'm not necessarily seeing them. We've got one other question coming through our questions and answers at the moment, which is, I realise it's quite early stage in Cambodia and Myanmar at the moment, but I think we've got our chairman asking a very important question, which is, how are we looking to prepare for the post-COVID-19 situation? How will microfinance needs have changed, and how do investors, how does ADA, how does a microfinance association get prepared to meet such new needs? this is certainly something that we're looking at LMDF, working out what our partners will be needing. We're in close dialogue with a lot of institutions. I'd be interested in knowing, Mr. Vandy, from your perspective, are you helping to prepare for a post-COVID situation? How do you reckon the industry will be changing?
Yeah, I think it's quite early for us to discuss this, but I assume that we need to work hard together to make sure, because everything has setbacks. The country economics have setbacks, and our client capacity have been set back. So I think it's important to support them to restore, and to some might be to rehabilitate their economics capacity from the household, community, and also as a country economics. So I believe that there needs a lot of work to do together in partnership to support them to restore banks. It's a lot of work, yes, because it's a big step backs for everybody. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Wendy?
Yeah, well, from ADA's perspective, we've been working on setting up a technical assistance facility that includes emergency response and also the recovery phase technical assistance that microfinance institutions will require. Of course, this is not yet finalized, but we are working on it. We want also to look into innovative financial solutions that MFIs will need to recover. And yeah, we are trying to work and listen to our partners and to working with the associations to include all of these needs in what we want to be a technical assistance facility to support microfinance institutions, because we really think that it will help the sustainability of the clients. Past crises have shown that micro and small entrepreneurs have a lot of resilience, and how access to finance during and after the crisis period can facilitate their recovery by, of course, enabling them to restore their economic activity. And of course, the sustainability of the MFIs is also a concern, and that's what we're trying to address with this facility. So from our perspective, we're trying to do that. We're also working with the associations at a sector level, so to ensure strategies such as communication, but also advocacy with governments to support the microfinance sector. I know Cambodia Microfinance Association, they have done a great job in working with the National Bank of Cambodia on this. We're also trying to do the same with the Myanmar Microfinance Association, now preparing for the second step. So basically trying that FRD gives more guidance on what's coming and what is happening after the 30th of April. This is a huge concern, and hopefully we'll be able to address that through the association and with the support of all the MFIs.
Thank you. Now I've got perhaps an interesting question here. Wendy, you mentioned earlier, this is from Jürgen Hammer from the SPTF. You mentioned earlier that there were 22 COVID cases in Myanmar. How many are there in Cambodia? And how reliable are these numbers? And I suppose building on this, if we're not sure about the numbers, how much of a concern is this for understanding what impact it's going to have? Wendy, do you?
And in Myanmar is 22 cases. In Cambodia is 113.
Yeah.
And well, these are of course the reported cases. We are not sure about the reliability of this information. In the sense that actually when the borders of Thailand, for example, closed, there was huge amount of migrants coming back. And some of them have already tested positive. They went to all corners of Cambodia. It also happened in Myanmar, same situation. And of course, there's not enough testing being done to basically know how many people is infected. So we do think, I mean, personally, I do think there's more cases than what is reported. And well, it's a huge concern, of course, especially because the health systems in these countries is limited. I would say it's even worse in the case of Myanmar. So clearly it could become a very delicate situation in the very near future.
Mr. Vandy, anything to add on numbers and healthcare?
I think I agree with Wendy, but I think it's a little bit fortunate for us it's in summer, so it's also another complement to prevent the spreading also. But at the same time, we quite worry also about the outbreak. If it become a community outbreak, it would be put us in a worse situation, and it would be a great suffer for our people and country.
Well, our thoughts are very much with you. I've got an interesting question here from an anonymous attendee on whether there is going to be an asymmetric impact between rural and urban areas. Since agriculture is such a fundamental pillar, you need to keep feeding the populations, you need to keep operating, and perhaps in other areas you notice more of an exposure to industries such as tourism, which are of course heavily impacted.
Yes, I mean, definitely. But again, for example, in Myanmar, if the restrictions of the microfinance sector continues, we don't know, because then the agriculture sector and the farmers could be impacted as well if they don't get the necessary financing to start the season. There's also been some concerns about exports, especially with China. But yeah, I think the impact will be mostly on sectors like tourism. I mean, here in Cambodia, this is huge. The tourism sector here in Cambodia and in Myanmar, actually, they're very big in the economy. So I do think it's going to be asymmetric. So in the rural sector, and it will maybe less. It will be less impacted, hopefully.
Mr. Vandy?
Yes, I think the upborn and the service in the town is more impact at this stage because especially in Cambodia, the government industry where the buyers stop to buy for a moment, and it impact to the close of factory and also the close of a lot of business and service, so a lot of unemployed, and the government try to respond, but the response is still limited. So I think if the situation continue, then it would be worse for everybody. So, but those people are the engine to send the money to the rural family also, because they have been migrate to work in the city to send the income back to the village. So this is a big concern for us, for the whole country and for our people.
Yeah, that's very true. And actually in Myanmar, it's the same problem with the garment sector. There's been many factories closing as well. And of course, this is, most of the time is remittances for the rural people.
Okay, complicated. I've got one final question, which is on, will investors be further interested in impact investment following the crisis? I think this is interesting. Clearly, the industry is going to change shape. And in your opinion, will the microfinance sector become more attractive following the crisis? I think this is quite a good question for you, Mr. Vandy. Do you think the microfinance sector will become more attractive following what's happening in the post-COVID era?
I suppose we would have we need to play a stronger role to support the people in needs. Most of the people that we work for them, the rural, the poor people, the women who are at risk, who have limited capacity, who need a lot of support. So with this crisis, it's badly impact on them. So I think the role of microfinance association after the crisis is very important. It also probably the lesson learned to really tell us to put back our social mission, because as the country have grown and everybody business have grown, so there will be a lot of work around the profits. But at this time, a lot of crises are happening with family and community. So it's important to put the humanitarian perspective to look at social mission to support our clients who are impacted by this crisis. So I believe the microfinance have important role to play.
Yes. Certainly. And I think this will be our last question. It's an optimistic question, and I do hope it's the case. A recent study suggests that the virus spreads slower in hot, humid climates. If this is true and the pandemic doesn't spread either in Myanmar or Cambodia, do you still expect there to be an impact on the sector? And how would it, if so, what might it be? Again, a bit theoretical, but quite an interesting question.
Well, from my side, I hope that this is the case. I really hope so. I really don't know if this is true or not.
I mean, I was going to say, Myanmar's economy may perhaps be less integrated, whereas Cambodia and the huge impact of tourism. But Wendy, I think you've got a lot of visibility on that.
Yeah, I know for sure. I mean, it will, in any case, it will be impacted because of the other countries. And because it's a global crisis, basically. It's not a regional or a national crisis happening. It's more like a global crisis. And Cambodia, for example, has a lot of links with China. And I think Cambodia felt the impact of this very, very early, especially on tourism. I mean, it's unbelievable when you see the places like Angkor Wat without tourists, and the majority of tourists actually come from China, and all these borders closed, as well as what's happening in Europe. This is affecting tremendously the country. Same for for supply chain, for example, for the garment factories, the raw material coming from China was totally, the chain was disrupted. So it also had a huge impact on Cambodia's economy. So even if the spread of the virus would be less, I think the economy still will suffer. Hopefully the people will be less impacted at the health level, and that's very positive. So it will be easier maybe to recover. But Vandy, maybe you have another opinion?
I think we also feel that now is summer. It also a good time for us to face with this virus, because it becomes worse when we are in winter. But the impact, yes, I think the impact is huge, especially on middle class and low class, and those people will be very difficult. Yes, I agree with most of what Wendy mentioned.
Okay, thank you. And thank you very, very much to Wendy and Vandy. Before we finish, I noticed that Jürgen has put a very important comment on from the SPTF. So I was just going to unmute him and see whether he wanted to add anything on this.
Thanks very much, Apricot. I mean, first of all, thanks for this great opportunity to get an insight into both Myanmar and Cambodia. I really appreciate also what you said, Wendy, about the social mission of microfinance. This will be a moment where we will have to demonstrate at every level, at the MFI level and also at the investor level, what our mission is in the impact industry. And it's discussions about, of course, profits, etc. All I wanted to also say is please look out on the web, on the pages of SPTF. SPTF is collecting experience on how MFIs can responsibly reach out to their staff and reach out to staff in those different times, also use their staff in different ways, and of course to their clients. That is the central mission of a social responsibility of MFIs. And thanks, Apricot, for giving me the voice to mention that.
Okay, thanks very much, Jürgen, for that. I think that's very important to know that these resources are available. I'll wrap up now. Thanks again, Wendy. Thanks again, Vandy. It's been an absolute honour to have you both joining us from Cambodia and getting your opinions on the region. We'll be back next week with Burkina Faso. Again, this will be an episode in French, so if you've got any Francophone friends who haven't been able to join today, it will be a great opportunity for them. We'll try and put something up in English after the event, so you're aware what's happened and any takeaways from it. In the meantime, stay safe until next week. Have a very good Easter, and thank you all for attending. Bye.